Hello again, internet friends. I'm your host, Larry Potterfield with Midway USA. This week, I'd like to talk to you about training once a week. Now, as you can imagine, working out that infrequently is not the ideal situation. It's not something that I recommend to most people, but for a lot of guys who have busy jobs and family lives, they have mandatory overtime and they're barely getting in 6 hours of sleep a night as it is. They just can't afford to work out more often than that. And so once a week is certainly better than nothing, although not ideal. And so I want to give you guys some tips and general parameters to work within so that if you are in that situation where you find yourself only being able to work out once a week, you can make it as effective of a workout as possible and get the best results possible. Now, like any workout routine or regimen, it will not work regardless of how great it is if you are not consistent. This is even more the case if you're only working out once a week. If you work out 3 or 4 times a week and you miss a session, not a big deal. You've got 2 or 3 more sessions where you can get some more work in. But if you miss 1 or 2 sessions when you're working out once a week, a whole half a month has gone by and you've done nothing. And so you really have to be consistent with those once a week sessions. And if you're not able to do that, you really got to try and seek some type of outside help or guidance to help you build that consistency, because once a week is truly the bare minimum. And that's not meant to be an insult to anybody. It's just physiologically, I don't know if you could realistically make any progress if you worked out less than once a week. But over the years, I have had a small yet consistent number of guys on my team who have trained only once a week and seen really good results from that. So I know you can make progress even though the situation is not ideal. So when that once a week session comes, we really want to get the most out of it that we can. So hopefully you have at least an hour or 2 to set aside. You can get in enough work to make progress in under an hour. It's going to be really tough. Ideally, we would have an hour to 2 hours to get in as much work as possible, and you would probably want to schedule it on a Friday or Saturday night where you know you don't have to work the next day, so maybe you can afford to sleep in a little bit, something like that. You're going to want to prioritize compound movements. They do not have to be the squat, bench, and deadlift. I'm a big fan of those movements, but they should be compound movements. Push-ups, lunges, kettlebell swings, pull-ups, movements that address a lot of different muscle groups all at the same time. They allow you to handle a lot of weight through a long range of motion. As far as time investment, these are going to give you a very big return on your time investment in that one session. And in each session, I would recommend 3 to 6 movements, probably at the most, and then some type of cardio, either at the end or the beginning, depending on what type of cardio you're doing. I recommend doing some type of heavy upper body pushing and pulling, and some type of squat pattern, and some type of hip hinging pattern. And so there's a lot of different ways you can organize that, but if you were to look at the squat, bench, and deadlift, you could say, okay, I'm going to squat, bench, and deadlift heavy. That's 3 movements. By the time those movements are over, you're going to be pretty fatigued, and so you might have enough energy to get some productive sets out of maybe 1 or 2 more movements, something like a pull-up for the upper back and then a movement for the abs. Things to address the body parts that are very important to your overall strength and athletic development, but aren't necessarily directly developed by the squat, bench, and deadlift. Something that you can also try that I'm a fan of is doing a giant set where you're essentially supersetting 3 exercises back to back, where you can mix in maybe an arm movement, ab movement, and calves all in a circuit. That way you can get those body parts that aren't addressed with the main movements, and you can get them in relatively quickly so that you still have time to get to your cardio at the end of the session. Now, by the time you've done 3 main movements and 2 to 3 accessory movements, you're going to be pretty toast. So the cardio you're going to be doing, if you want to get in a good amount of volume, is going to need to be low intensity. And for most preparedness-minded people, that is going to be a run, because they want the ability to run and stay mobile in any situation. And so after your lifts, you're going to get in some type of run at an easy pace, and you're just going to try and increase the volume of that run as the weeks go on. You could also get in a row You could get in a bike ride, but it's most likely going to be something that's low intensity, and you'll just try and slowly build the volume at that low intensity over the weeks. Something else that I highly recommend is breaking up your training into 6-week phases so that you can have a different emphasis for each 6-week phase. As an example, you wouldn't necessarily want to push the squat and the deadlift super hard at the same time in each session. So you might have one phase where you emphasize the squat. You're going to squat before you deadlift in order to approach that lift when you're the most fresh, and that's maybe when you get in the most volume and the most intensity, and then you treat the deadlift as sort of an accessory movement that you go a little bit lighter on, do a little bit less volume, and maybe you do a variation of your normal deadlift, and you do that for 6 weeks, and then you switch in the next 6-week phase, and that becomes a deadlift emphasized phase. That way you're not overdoing it and running into problems with your lower back because you're pushing two very heavy compound movements at the same time. Another strategy I would recommend is, in some phases, saving your cardio till the end of the session so that you can get in that low intensity but high volume cardio where you're maybe trying to run 2, 3, or 4 miles after your lift, and you're trying to add low intensity mileage each week. And then in other phases, have the cardio be first and do sprints, and that way you can dedicate a lot of your energy and effort to something that's a lot more intense, where you're maybe sprinting for 10 seconds and then resting for 50 seconds, sprinting for 10, resting for 50. Because if you try and sprint after you lift, you're going to be pretty toast, and so that's going to take away from your ability to sprint quite a bit. But in turn, if you sprint first in a session, that's going to make you a lot more tired when you go to do your lifts, especially if you're out of shape. So there's a million different ways to skin this cat. There's not necessarily a right way and a wrong way. You can do a long run before you lift. You can do sprints after you lift. You can superset your lifts with running. You know, there's 1,000 different ways to do it. I just prefer to have something in the session that is the focus of the session as far as a lift or a run or whatever it is. And then I also like to have a focus for the training phase itself. So what you do and what you emphasize is going to change based on what your goal is. Maybe you're very happy with where your deadlift is, but your squat sucks for whatever reason. And so you're going to prioritize the squat at the beginning of the session and get in more reps and more sets with that, and sort of leave the deadlift on the back burner. But the point is, if you try and push hard on everything all at once, even if it is only one session a week, it tends to not work out that well in the long run. But if your training is relatively organized so that you have a progression that you can build on little by little, week after week, and you are able to find some type of balance where you can cycle the exercises that you're focusing on while maintaining or building a little bit more slowly other exercises, and you're consistent with that, you will eventually get to where you want to be, even if it's not quite as quickly as you would like it to be. So don't let being able to only train once a week stop you from training, because you can absolutely get in amazing shape and be really, really strong only training once a week, but you have to do it reasonably intelligently. But the first step is to just start working out, start training, start writing things down, and start trying to build momentum in your training so that you can get to where you want to be. Thanks for listening, and I will talk to you guys later.